Okay, we are back.
Awesome.
So, welcome everybody to the book club on Facing Codependence by Pia Melody. And tonight we have Healthy Love and James.
Hey guys.
Hi, everyone.
So, let's see here if people are finding their way.
We have our misery cowboy.
Yes, C. Finn, JJFX, Sam, Kevin. Hey, yeah. Welcome, welcome. So, okay, I have my notes on this book. I haven't posted them yet to my website. I still need to clean them up. Um, but I guess, is there anything that you guys want to add before we kind of get into that?
Do you want to share, James, how you hated and loved the book at the same time?
I didn't hate it. It brings up a lot of like feelings of like aha moments or oh crap moments where you you read the text and then you're like, wait, that sounds a lot like me, and you start realizing things that you never knew before, and it's kind of scary. It's a lot to take, just like the last Pia Melody book. So
Yeah.
I guess it's to be expected.
I was going to quit book club if Dana was saying that we have another PM. I felt like I'm done.
I don't think she has any. Wait, she has one more, I think.
I think she might have one more. Yeah. We've read three.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're all fantastic, but she just does such a great job, I think, of really kind of laying this stuff out. And it can be really triggering because she's so concise with
Mhm.
how she hits every single point. And you're like you were saying, James, you're like, wow, yikes. Yeah, I see a lot of
Like,
myself
yeah,
in that.
like super details where it's
Yeah.
it's it's freaky how on point she is.
Yes, I agree. And she says, even at the end of the book, which I really liked, she said, um, recovery, like when all of this stuff starts coming up and we start really understanding our past and how our past impacts the present and all of that, she says, the pain of recovery can be intense, but it's totally worth it.
Hmm.
The pain of going back to the way we were is just, it means to live an unbearable life.
Right.
And she's made some comment about, uh, when your demons start surfacing, you're better off trying to snuggle with them or else they're going to bite you on the butt. And I really liked that because a lot of the stuff, it's like we really do need to get
It needs to come up.
it needs to come up and we need to just get a handle on it so it's not
Right.
controlling our lives in
Yeah.
subconscious ways.
Well,
And
I was
otherwise,
sorry.
you're kind of pushing him to the side, and it just sits there.
Right. And I think she'd mentioned in the one of the other books, like there is no healthy relationship possible if a person's got all of this unresolved dysfunction.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
because you're not in reality.
right. And
Yeah.
you're seeing the fantasy of the other person, you're seeing the fantasy of the relationship. If we've got our own and she talks, let me get my notes. She talks about this, how codependency is, she calls it a disease of immaturity, which, ouch.
Yeah, I
Um,
know, right?
yeah.
I like it. No, I actually like it better because if someone tells me I'm immature, I feel like I can actually learn and mature. I
Yeah.
rather deal with my maturity issue, like my development issue, than my psychological issue. To be honest with you, that's better.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's kind of both. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and but yeah, I was, it's a little like it kind of takes you back a little bit because it can be a little offensive. Like, what do you mean I'm immature? Especially if
Yeah.
if I think if a person's been if they haven't been in the role of more of like the dependent codependent, like as I was going through this book, I'm like, I am the anti-dependent. And I've always been fiercely independent, held my own, um, and so it was like I never saw myself as immature. If anything, I was always the young adult, you
Yeah.
know, even at a really young age. And so, but I get it now because even that sense of like anti-dependence and being overly mature for your age is still a sign of immaturity.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, in my case, reading it was like a double load of, things I need to deal with, because I was looking at dealing with my codependency for myself, but also my daughter's future,
Yeah.
is at stake. So first part of the book was very hard for me. And then when she touched on how to face your codependency, and she makes a very clear statement that you have to stop looking at how your behavior right now is impacting your child. Just deal with your codependency, because that's the way to really make that impact with your child. And I was like, okay, let me just really focus here. And
Yeah.
that gave me a little bit like I can breathe again room.
Yeah.
I was so freaking guilt tripping myself, which is another, basically a symptom of codependency.
Well, it's tough to read that in your current state, you're gonna pass it on to your child in some way. And
Yeah.
that's that's not
Especially when she
very
says that if you are codependent, basically you have no other choice than to cause a codependency in your child.
Mhm.
And only if you start dealing with it, that's the only way out of it. Otherwise, just like codependency goes from generation to generation.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all
And
right.
I really feel like this book too is a guide for how to be a healthy parent. Because even if a person maybe doesn't identify as codependent or doesn't have extreme behaviors that would classify as codependent, she just covers so much ground in here as far as like what healthy boundaries are, how to effectively understand our own wants and needs,
Yep.
how to understand and relate to children with encouraging and like nurturing their own wants and needs.
Right.
And so much of this stuff, I mean, I think about like the different parenting books that have been out over the years. And I'm like, man, Pia, I really would love for her to write a parenting book, because this stuff is just, it's so needed. Like these discussions are so needed, because even if a person's relatively healthy, odds are they're not thinking about this kind of stuff, this boundaries and healthy dynamics, like how to raise a healthy child in this way. Yeah. It's so key. So
Well,
let
kind of
me,
unexpected though. I didn't expect there to be much about parenting in it.
Are you parent, James? Because I don't remember.
Yeah, I have a daughter.
Okay. So you get that space of
Yeah,
feeling
that's what
double
I'm saying.
like
It hit
like a
home.
double-edged sword.
I was like, oh no. Now I feel like the most terrible parent of all time, but I know that's not it. But when you're reading it, it really it hits you pretty hard.
yeah. Well, let's jump into the first part of the notes here, and then we can go through it. And you guys feel free to jump in with anything as you think about it. So this book, Pia really lays out she has 5 main points that she feels codependent people have difficulty with 5 of the following. The first one is experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem, setting functional boundaries, owning and expressing their own reality, taking care of their adult needs and wants, experiencing and expressing their reality moderately. And she goes into detail. And so basically, recovering from codependency is going to include like getting those 5 areas kind of under control and learning like what healthy self-esteem is and what it isn't, and what functional boundaries are and what they aren't. And the whole book really just like outlines all of this. So she talks about the appropriate levels of self-esteem, and she says basically a healthy sense of self-esteem remains when when a person makes a mistake or is treated poorly by another. When some sort of painful life event happens, they declare bankruptcy, they lose their job, whatever might happen, they might feel guilt, fear, anger, or pain, but they don't let it impact their self-worth. So really keeping their self-worth and their hurt feelings in 2 different buckets.
Right.
And that's something that we've talked about before on the channel. And so she explains like there's the different types of unhealthy self-esteem, and there's that less than, and then there's the greater than, and then there's the others. And so less than self-esteem is feelings of inferiority, like you feel less than others. The greater than is feelings of grandiosity or superiority. And then others type of self-esteem was where we get self-esteem from other people. So it's that continual need for validation that we're okay. Or
things.
Or things, right? Like degrees, advanced degrees, status, clothing, status type car.
Your performance.
Or how well our children do, or what our children do. These kinds of things. And that's a very fragile way to live. And if a person's getting their self-esteem from outside of themselves, especially if they're getting it from their child, then that right there just sets up a really dysfunctional relationship, because then the child's validation is, she talks about the difference between a functional family and a dysfunctional family is a functional family. The parent is there to meet the child's needs. In a dysfunctional family, the child is there to meet the parent's needs. And I thought that was really well said. And so that other self-esteem, so you can see if the child is there to meet the parent's own needs for self-esteem, it's skewed right from day one.
The child has no ability to just be who they really are.
Yes.
They are there just basically to make the parent happy, or I don't know, fulfill the needs of the parent all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the second point is she talked about setting functional boundaries. And I really like how she viewed, well, actually, let's back up to self-esteem real quick. Have you guys noticed, like, what would you say your relationship is with self-esteem?
James, you go. I can't hear James.
Oh, James, we can't hear you. Hold on. Oh, that was a weird thing on my end. Hold on. There, James?
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you now. Weird. I don't know.
It's been kind of exactly how she described in the book, up and down, depending on, outside instead of within myself. And it's tough to say on camera, but it's the truth. So there was many eye-opening moments in the book, and this was definitely one of them. And it sucks, but at least now I know one thing I need to work on to actually solve the codependency, because I've read 2 other codependency books, and they kind of go, into detail of what to do, but not like how Pia Melody does. And you know what I'm talking about. She's very direct and to the point, and in great detail. So
it's interesting you mention different books, because I feel like other literature is like pushing you to feel like super, super good. Like they do not address that it should be like moderation. Like you shouldn't feel super excited and like be on this high level all the time and be, like grandiosity. And I feel like other books that I've read before are like different videos I watched. It was all about just empower yourself, like just like get it going, stay like powerful, all these things. So I feel her saying that it's all about moderation and your self-esteem should come from within and just like be this sense of inherent value just because you are. That's perfect. No, I don't have that yet. I do have moments though. So
and I don't know if it was her or if it was another video I was watching, but somewhere somebody had said something like, each human being is here to basically sing your own song. Like there is.
I like that.
Love it.
And I do too. I thought that was so well said. Like each person has their own set of strengths and weaknesses and their own passions and interests. And like there's never been anybody here like you before. There's never been, there'll never be anybody like you after you. Like truly there is this uniqueness, and she just describes it as preciousness about each person. But also balanced in a way of like, but we're all precious. Like we all have this uniqueness about us. But that's where that inherent worth comes from, is like everybody has their own song. And if they're nurtured in the right way, then they're more able to readily express it. But the good news is, as adults, we can go back and we can start working on becoming more authentic and more ourselves, so we really can get in tune with singing that song.
Yeah.
And last, Miranda is asking here, basically, how do we get validation from within?
Good question.
And I really do think it was what Healthy Love was talking about. Like, it's truly just tapping into realizing, it's understanding that you have inherent value and worth. Like you are so unique. And I mean, my goodness, like the odds of being born are like something like 1 in 400 billion. So like just right there, the fact that you made it.
You made it.
You made it. Like you're here, you just kind of won the lotto in a sense. I mean, it's the odds of you being here is just so infinitesimal. And so I think
it's a given. It's a given. She actually says that being valuable, it's a natural characteristic of being a child.
Yeah.
Just value in you being. And but I think to answer the question, like, how do you get there? So Pia based all her work basically in her like spirituality. So, and for her it was, I think, Christianity, but you can have your own spirituality. And basically, according to her, your value comes a lot from accepting, like from your relationship with your higher power and from discovering your perfect imperfections. So we're gonna talk more about it later, but you basically valuing yourself with all the flaws and mistakes you make, and you have a higher power that helps you out and guides you to just, get to the next level. I don't know, learn from your mistakes, and also just like sharing it with others and really hearing other people experience. So I don't think that those 5 core symptoms, you can look at them like separately, because if you read the whole book, you will see that they all are connected with each other. Like your value is connected with how you express your boundaries and how you keep your boundaries and how you take care of your own wants and needs and all of that together. So it's not a one dimension, it's all of those dimensions together. I don't think I answered the question. If I confused you more, I'm sorry.
Well, and Missouri Cowboy makes the comment that he has a hard time accepting that everyone is precious. And I can totally appreciate that, especially when you're talking about, horrific abusers. And I think that everybody starts off as precious.
Yeah.
And when you have somebody that's extremely abusive and exploitative, I agree. There comes a point where it's like their level of toxicity outweighs their preciousness.
Yeah.
And that's why we have jail. That's why we have the death penalty in certain places. So I agree but I think everybody has, and it's sad because I think a lot of us know a lot of abusers are like, man, if you could just take away everything that's all of this toxicity with you, like there's so much right with you underneath that. But like, we can't gloss over all of the abuse and toxicity. So I
get that too. Yeah. I struggle.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's a codependent thing to see that there's good in people underneath all the toxic and all the sludge. But that's also very dangerous too.
I agree. I think it's important that we see them for who they are, not who they could be.
Yep.
Because then we're slipping back into the fantasy.
I just had a silly thought. I don't know if that will answer it, but I feel like in the animal world, like the tiger is as valid as the antelope and as valid as the little bunny. Like they all precious when they were born, but they all have like, but you can say like when you are a little bunny, like you hate the tiger and you don't want tiger to be as valuable as you are, because what tiger does is goes around and eats bunnies and antelope. So like there is some kind of value in just life itself, but what they do to you, that is not, the value of the human is not correlated to what the human does to other human. The value just of life itself, I would just focus on that. I don't know. That's the only thing that helps
I
me.
know. I guess I struggle with that because I'm not overly enchanted with human life.
Well, I like my life.
Well, no,
life be valuable.
I don't get me wrong. I mean, I think certain people, they're so dangerous and destructive that they bring more pain than they do value.
Yeah.
And so I'm not overly like, I think everybody is so precious and their life has value, because I think at some point, like, it doesn't.
Well, tigers are great. Let's keep them in the cage so they won't eat us, right?
Say that again?
Tigers are great, but let's keep them in the cage so they won't eat us. Like, and then if tiger goes mad, we're just gonna kill the tiger. That's what I'm thinking. My therapist did this story about animals one time too, to show me how abusers are dangerous, but I don't see it. So he said abusers are like tigers. Would you walk into the cage with a tiger? Why are you going on a date with someone who is
a tiger?
Like a freaking tiger. And I'm like, I am not going on a date with tigers again. So yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I guess it's just seeing people for who they are and then responding accordingly, Okay, let's move on to point number 2.
Yep.
Okay.
Life forever.
Yeah, boundaries. Okay, so setting functional boundaries. And she talks about boundaries are like a skin, and they serve 3 functions. First one is to keep certain people from coming into our space and abusing us. The second one is to keep ourselves from abusing others. And the third is to give each of us a way of being ourselves. So, and then she talks about boundaries are both internal and external. So our external boundaries would be physical and sexual. So physical is anything relating to non-sexual. So who gets in our personal space, how we get into other people's personal space. And then if that physical boundary is intact, then both people, there's permission and consent given. Like, yes, you can borrow my coffee cup, or yes, I would love a hug, right? These kinds of things, or asking another person, hey, is it okay if I give you a hug? Or, hey, can I borrow your jacket? Like instead of just taking it, like these kinds of things.
I'm sorry. I just, because it keeps showing up, like you say, boundaries now, external and internal, and she really made such a great point when she described it like a bell or like a bulletproof vest. And I think that just really stuck to like my understanding of boundaries. Like, and I'm thinking, like, I'm walking with this little bell around me, and that's how I respect my space and the other people's space, and how close they can be, how if they can touch me or not. And then the emotions, the internal boundaries, like this bulletproof jacket that protects my heart and or my brain too. So that was so great. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like to think of it. There was one book that we read. I think it was the Respect Me Rules, and they talked about boundaries and like learning to control them. And they talked about it in terms of like zipping or unzipping a jacket. And when we're missing that internal boundary, we have the zipper on the outside and we let other people just unzip. And so meaning like they'll ask us questions and we just answer, that we feel compelled to share with them whatever they want us to share with them, versus healthy boundaries is turning that zipper inward and we control how much we express or answer or say or don't say with others. And I liked that analogy too.
The other thing that I got really clear about is she actually says it takes effort to model to enforce your boundaries and to model great boundaries with others. Like, it actually takes effort. Because I almost feel like we survivor, we almost like, I don't want to say all of us, but some of us like expect that should be easier, that it should be natural because that's a healthy thing. So it should be easier. We should know how to do it. And it just should be given that at some point we will get it. She doesn't say at some point you will get it and it will be natural. It's actually always an effort.
Yeah, she talks about that late in the healing chapter at the end of the book about how when we're learning these new skills, it's going to feel very uncomfortable. And she said it's very common for people to really struggle with like what moderation is. And she gives an example of to the woman or to the person that's used to being very like rigid in their approach to, let's say, doing dishes, for them to leave dirty dishes in the sink overnight might feel like they are being chaotic. And I thought that was a really good thing, because when people start setting boundaries, it's very common that they start feeling selfish and rude. Or if they start, she gave a whole bunch of different lists of when we start correcting these imbalances, when we start being moderate, we can either feel like we're being really controlling or we can feel chaotic. If we start having reasonable self-esteem, we can start feeling very self-absorbed or very like we don't have self-esteem. And or very low, kind of like what last Miranda was saying, like, well, if you don't get self-esteem from others, like where does it come from? So there's this period where we're trying to just get our sea legs about where are we in all of this and kind of figuring it out. There's something I want to point out about that as well, is when we start going through this process and we start working through these 5 core areas, and we see how difficult it can be with just little things, with how we moderate our behavior and with how setting boundaries and self-esteem and this kind of stuff. It's important to realize that abusers, if they were to ever change, would go through a very similar process. And I think it's helpful to realize how difficult it is for us that want to change. So a lot of people, because people think the same thing about abusers, they're like, oh, that it would be easy, right? Like it's like flipping a switch. Well, it's not hard. Like you just stop yelling.
Have to stop doing it. Yeah.
Right. Like you stop yelling, you stop treating me terrible, whatever, but it's interwoven throughout their whole personality. And to make changes like that, it's consistent action and introspection on like a very regular, like, probably dozens of times a day basis.
Yeah.
So I think when people can see like how difficult change really is, then you see like, oh my gosh, and here I am like wanting to change and it's an uphill climb. And so for somebody that doesn't want to do this, like, oh, forget it. Like they're a million miles away from changing. A porcupine's not going to turn into a kitten.
Yeah, especially if you are trained, to be that way by your unconscious, unaware parents.
Yeah,
and
you
then
have to you have to reprogram yourself completely, and it's really tough to get started and to keep it up, to make it happen.
Yep.
I've been guilty of, I'll do it a couple of days and then some stressor happens, work or home life or whatever, and you kind of get off track, and it's hard to find your way back on track once you get off of it.
It's interesting you say that, because I have a similar experience. I feel like some situation, and Pia also addresses that we go from, especially if we have 2 caregivers with 2 different types of boundaries, like non-existence or gaps or walls, and we learn 2 different ways of having our boundaries, so we can go from one extreme to the other extreme. So I know some situation I'm like, no boundaries, like especially in my past, like 0 boundary whatsoever. I wasn't even aware of what boundaries are. Yeah. And then there were other situations, like let's say the physical touch. I had walls, like if you freaking touched me, I would like go after you and try to, I don't know, like kick you or something. Like I would, like, and I was like teenager then, right? So I was uncontrollable, but I was really going from one extreme to the other extreme throughout my life until I started some healing and, finding out like, oh, wow, being an adult is actually trying to find the like middle ground of all of it. And yep. That's where I am right now, like looking for my middle ground most of the time. And it's not such an easy thing to do it.
It's not, but it's so interesting. So here, Bear Nolan makes a comment, says, Buddha would love boundaries.
Oh, I love that comment. Yes.
I do too. Yeah. How can you love another without first knowing where you end and they begin? And that is so well said, because it's so true. Like if we're so enmeshed with another person, we're not seeing them for who they really are. It's either the fantasy or it's the expectation, or it's that need for validation. And when we can realize like what we have control over, which is ourselves, and we're not like, there's so much I really enjoyed out of this book. Like when we have healthy self-esteem and we're not relying on them to build our self-esteem, and we're not coming from a place of like less than or greater than, then we can actually be in ourselves and we can appreciate, there's this room to breathe, and then they can breathe. Cause it's like, you can totally be you, because I don't need you to be anything other than you are, assuming that they're a healthy person, right? Or like a reason that like on the path. Right. And we have that healthy, that functional, I like how she says that too. It's functional or dysfunctional. The functional internal boundary of, if they say anything that, like, I get to decide where that lands within me. Like it might hurt my feelings, but it doesn't need to negatively impact my self-worth. Or it might be something that's offensive to me, but I can determine like, oh, that's a reflection of them. That's not a reflection of me.
Right.
Like I don't have to own that. There's so much power there when you realize like, yes, this is my space and this is your space. And I really can choose like what comes into my space. And she talks about that with, well, let me go back to the sexual boundary, then we'll move over to the internal boundary. But the sexual boundary controls space and touch and says who, what, when, where, why, and how, and also has respect for the other person. So it's a give and take. Our internal boundary, which is what we were just talking about, protects our thinking, feeling, and behavior and keeps them functional. When we take responsibility for our thinking, feeling, and behavior and keep that separate from that of others, we stop blaming them for what we think, feel, and do. And we effectively stop for those that might be like manipulating and controlling those around them. And we also stop getting caught up in manipulative and controlling behavior. A person without boundaries often has their own boundaries violated, as well as violates the boundaries of others, as everything is blurred. I think that is so right on.
Well, just like you just said, you don't know where you stop and they begin.
Right. And if we're looking to them, and I had shared something the other day about when I was working at a domestic violence shelter, and I felt, Bear, real quick, thank you for the live stream donation. He says, love you guys.
Oh,
I know. Ow. Appreciate it. That's awesome. But when I was working at a domestic violence shelter, I was in completely new territory. And this was before I was dating Jack at the time, but I didn't know everything that was going on. And so I was not familiar with trauma to the extent of what a lot of these women had gone through. And so all of my skill set, which was basically like overly reassuring people in a physical way, hugging, hand on a shoulder, just trying to, prolonged eye contact, like these kinds of things to make people feel safe. It had the exact opposite effect there. And I felt so helpless, but instead of realizing that I was crossing a boundary with them, I doubled up my efforts, thinking like, I'm just not getting clear to them that I am a safe person and that I care. So I just need to work twice as hard. But the reality is that was pushing them away twice as much, right? Because it was a violation of their boundary. It just didn't compute for me. So the understanding of how we want to interact with people and how they want to be interacted with are two very different things.
Yes.
And to just be aware of that. So yeah, it's just such an eye opener when we see that. And she talks about too, the 4 different kinds of boundary issues that, and here's another thing. She refers to codependency as something that happens as the disease of immaturity from less than nurturing parenting. And I like that she makes this designation.
I don't like that.
Well, but I think it's important because people get hung up on like, oh, only abuse or neglect is an issue. But it's like there's on the more like quote unquote mild end of abuse and neglect can have similar disastrous consequences. And the goal isn't to avoid abuse and neglect. The goal is to move towards nurturing parenting. And so I like that she spelled that out, but I think a lot of people might have an issue with that because it's like, well, geez, like that's 90% of the world. And I think Pia would say, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
The good news, I'm sorry. The good news is here that, you know, it's true. We are probably like 90% of the world is codependent because we did not have a great nurturing, you know, parents. Our parents were raised by people who survived Second World War, and for them just to give us food and send us to school was good enough and give us roof over our head, and there was no bomb exploding, right? And you know, there are still some countries when there's reality, actually there is a war, so they don't get nurture either. So like if we look at the state of the world, we are actually lucky that we got to explore it and deal with it now, because our children now can raise their children in a different way. They can actually, like, it hit me. I was like, why? I've never talked with my daughter about, hey, parenting is a skill, you know, maybe I can talk to you a little bit about parenting at some point in your life. Like, it's a skill, we should talk about it. It's not just, we don't have any classes for parents. That if you go to a class about parenting, they will teach you how to change diapers, I think.
Right.
And breastfeeding. And then they probably will give you a little bit about how not to physically abuse a child, stuff like that. That's what I remember.
And I think you bring up a good point, right? So like we are on kind of this cusp of this emotional evolution. So we've had all these different, like, I think revolution, whatever you want to term it. But, you know, if you're in a country that's war torn, and, or even here in this country, 200, 300 years ago, you're not focused with like following your dreams or becoming self-aware. You're focused on survival.
Emotional health, like who the heck was thinking about whether you're depressed or not? Like, dude, you're alive.
Right. Like we don't have time for this. The cows need milking and the hay isn't going to bail itself. So like, you know, get out there and get going. And there was no childhood.
No, and I don't think
you were old enough, you did something. You fed chickens, you picked tomatoes, you took care of your younger brothers and sisters.
5 a.m. I had to milk the freaking cow in my grandma's during summer.
Yeah.
That's normal. That was thing to do. Child labor.
And I think to some extent, like helping out is important, right? But if you're working a child, you know, 12 hours a day and they're being treated like an adult, and if they're in a war-torn country or a developing country, they're exposed to really adult things at a very young age, death and disease and fear and loss. And none of that is, I'm sure, like able to be handled adequately, because who really, like, my goodness, even if you had mental health, like that's so much to try to process when that stuff happens at such a young age. And
and kids don't really have a boundary at all. So it's
right.
It makes it even harder.
It does.
I need to step up for like 30 seconds, just take care of the dog quickly because she's making noises and I don't want to do it. So I will mute myself.
Okay. So let me go on to the 4 different types of boundaries, because I think these are really good. So she talks about, James, what you're talking about, the no boundaries. And children have no boundaries. And also people that have gone through abuse or neglect tend to also have no boundaries. But health, so the opposite of that, people with healthy, intact boundaries, people with healthy, intact boundaries, they know where they begin and where others end. And they're able to do all of these 5 core areas that she says that we have trouble with. They're able to do this.
Right.
The second one is damaged boundaries. So a person with damaged boundaries has holes in them. They may be able to set boundaries in some others and not others. So accurate. Perhaps with friends, partners, parents, children, or when they are scared, tired, or sick. They may also try and control or manipulate others in certain situations, but not in others. It can also make a person take responsibility for someone else's feelings, thinking, or behavior. So the damaged boundary, I thought this was really profound. The damaged boundary is if we're not aware of where we end and where another person begins, then if another person's not responsible, if they have damaged boundaries and they're not handling their feelings appropriately. So she uses the example, if a person's not feeling shame or guilt for their behavior, then those feelings are going to go somewhere. And generally it's going to go to the child or to the spouse. So then the spouse might feel shame or guilt for the way that their spouse is acting. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I cannot believe he or she did that. Like this person has no shame. Whereas the child, because they have no boundary, they also have no context or understanding. The child might internalize that and be like, this is my fault. I did something wrong or bad. Instead of seeing it as like, no, mom or dad is the one is out of control. Like their behavior is a reflection of them. It's not a reflection of me. I'm 5 years old, right? Like I'm 5 years old. I'm acting like I'm 5 years old. But a child doesn't see it that way. So I thought that was good. And then she also talks about walls instead of boundaries. So walls are usually made up of anger or fear. And people with walls like this give off the message either verbally or non-verbally that they will become reactive if confronted or if things don't go their way. People who use a wall of fear retreat from others in life. They give off the energy that if you come close, they will fall apart. And there's also walls of silence where they observe and don't participate. Also, a wall of words is the opposite. They keep talking when others try and contribute. So all of these.
I'm going to interrupt you because that's exactly what I would do all the time in that wall. And I keep seeing still I'm doing it and I did it just again, but that's exactly how it's there for me. Like I rather talk than let other talk because I feel that I'm safer that way in many situations. Like not with you, it's not that case, but like I see myself in so many situations when I still have that band, like the wall of me talking a lot. Like social settings, when you like, I think there's 2 different types of people. Like if you are stressed in social settings, like some events, like networking, some people will be walking around and talking to everyone all the time. I will be that person. And some other people will be like quiet, standing by the wall. Yeah. That's a wall of silence. I was like, this is brilliant. Like I never thought that's a boundary issue. I've never thought that in my whole life.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth exploring. Like I have found there's been times in my life where I definitely have just like dominated a conversation or, and I can feel when I'm doing it and I'm embarrassed by my own behavior. Cause I'm like, Dana, my goodness, like what is going on? And
like, shut up, let them talk too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. So when this stuff comes to light, like even the self-esteem stuff too, like now that I'm more aware of it, I can see in conversations that when my self-esteem starts shifting, it's generally from like lower than to greater than. And now that I'm aware of it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's, and maybe like an example of greater than might be saying something that's ugly and like unnecessary about another person. Like, oh, that person, their hair is like, what were they thinking? But basically putting other people down. When like that's not necessary.
Like a judgmental place.
Yeah, thank you. That's a better way of saying it. Like just becoming judgmental or frustrated or feeling like you know, just this attitude of superiority. And
I have a like concrete example. So I love clean, organized house. And if I meet someone and I walk into their house and it's not tidy, I would right away make a judgment. I am better than you. Definitely. I will feel that. Definitely. But then if I walk somewhere and I see the house is like spotless, wonderful, it's like, and it's more organized than mine, I will make a judgment. I am so worse than this person. Like I have to look up to them and just, chase after them. Yeah. So
that's a great example.
They're like the higher power, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Like she talks about that in the intimacy factor book, that we're very quick to make certain other people that we feel have it more together, like into our higher power. We place them on a pedestal like that. It's interesting when you can start seeing this stuff in yourself surface, and then you realize this is a problem, like kind of that moderation, and realizing that really kind of well-adjusted people don't shift continually between like this less than, greater than, less than, greater than, or others than type self-esteem. It's more of a moderate, steady kind of thing. So what I found in me, when those feelings tend to surface, like the judgment things about other people, it's generally, the judgment happens when it's something I feel insecure about within my own self. And so I've tried to kind of, when that stuff does surface, I'm like, oh, Dana, that's something that you need to address, because there's something within you that's feeling insecure. And so take a step back and examine it, because it's not even about them. Like, it's really not about them. It's about me and my own insecurities.
Definitely.
So, and then she talks about, okay, so part 4 of this, the boundaries, is moving from a wall to a non-existent boundary and back again. And so this is what you were saying, Healthy Love. I think it was you about if you've 2 different parents, so if maybe one parent has walls and one parent has no boundaries, then it's really common for the child or the adult child of a family structure like that to start really going back and forth between having walls and then having no boundaries. And they're confused and they're trying to navigate the world, but they just don't know how in any effective way.
Yeah.
I think it's, I don't remember if she said it, but when I was looking at my example, I feel that it's especially extreme if you are raised by a parent when one was an abuser and the other was a victim, and you witnessed that abuse. Yeah. Like, I think that is really, like, because you see that 2 of very extreme word in front of you as a child.
Yeah. I would also, my experience with this, and what I've seen in others, is this is also very common after trauma. So like when people get out of abuse, if their old boundary system, which they might not have realized before, they might not have really had boundaries. So they trusted everyone. They took everyone at face value. They were an open book, right? They just, the zipper was on the outside. Other people set the pace. And that might have worked for them up until this abusive relationship. And so now they're like, oh my goodness, I'm so terrified of being hurt. And these walls go up, and then then it becomes very extreme. I don't trust anyone. Now I don't tell anybody anything. And it's this extreme behavior because they're trying to kind of figure out, how do I navigate the world again? Because when you're hurt like this, especially by somebody that you love or that was charming and you just didn't even see it coming, it can really throw a person for a loop, because it's like, man, my map of the world was really incomplete. And now I'm not sure how I go about this again. And I've experienced it, and I've seen it with other people where they're maybe from friends and family or even therapists around them treat it like, oh, this abusive relationship was an isolated incident. You really have to just go out there and love like you've never been hurt before. And then odds are they just crash right back into another abuser, because if they don't know if they can't discern an emotionally or physically safe person from an emotionally or physically unsafe person, this pattern is going to continue. And and of course it's difficult when you have an emotionally unsafe person who comes across like Prince or Princess Charming.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should be forbidden to say to anyone, oh, that was just isolated abuse situation and you can just go and trust someone else's, because that's basically,
it's the worst advice ever.
Yeah, and you don't deal with anything. I mean, even if that was isolated situation, you still got hurt. So you have to first deal with that hurt and learn from it. Like even Pia says here that nothing that you don't deal with, like things that you don't deal with, they are unresolved, and those are the very problematic. They cause very problematic symptoms in your life later, and if you don't, the longer you don't deal with it, the more problematic it becomes, and then you're ending up with more problematic situations basically, and there's no growth, no healing, nothing possible.
Yeah. Well, and when they say it, it's almost like they're denying your reality of what you went through.
God, yes.
And you're like, unless you were there, you're not going to understand it. So it completely changes. For me, it changed the entire way I looked at everything in the world.
It's like when if you were raped, they cannot just tell you, oh, that was isolated rape, like it just happened one time, it will never happen to you again. It's like, no, you have to deal with the trauma that you were impacted by.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think even if a person had, and I think I like how she talked about the boundaries. When a person has damaged boundaries, they have holes in their boundaries. I think those people especially can be really lost in the fog of all of this, because they're like, I mean, I've had people email me before. They're like, Dana, I am a high-powered executive, or I'm an attorney, or I'm a police officer. Like, I don't take crap from people. Like, how did I get here? How did I get here? And they're so, and I get goosebumps thinking about it. Like, my heart goes out to them, because I can only imagine how confusing that would be. It's like, I don't fit the mold of like this kind of classic codependent person, or even an abused person, but yet here I am. And I think that's the perfect example of a person with holes in their boundaries. Because most people, I mean, again, this stuff is not taught, and it really should be starting in elementary school with understanding healthy boundaries and all of this stuff.
Agreed.
Nobody sees this stuff coming, and we all think that we would, but we're all wrong, and it's easy to look at another person that's in an abusive relationship and just think, she needs to leave him, or he needs to leave her, or whatever. But it's a lot harder when you have that emotional investment in that person.
Yeah, or when you do recognize it, but you start making excuses and you start giving chances, and they can change. I just need to give them the opportunity to try to change, and it's not that easy at all.
And you have all of these dysfunctional messages from people around you that are like, well, nobody's perfect, and it could be worse, and all of this stuff. So it's just a person just at the end of it, they're like, I don't know, what's up is down and what's down is up. And how long do I hang on before I walk away? And am I a failure? Did I not try hard enough if I walk away? And what if they can change? And what if it's me? And there's all of this confusion at play. And, but yes,
I'm guilty of that for sure. Cause I asked a lot of people like, hey, is this normal? What should I do? What do you think? And, everybody has their own slightly different opinion and view on it. So it confuses you, because then, like you said, you don't know what's up or down. You don't know, you're not sure what direction to take at all, or what to do, because you're getting too many opinions.
Right.
Opinions of people that don't understand abuse at all.
Right. And I would even say, like, I feel like knowing what we all know now about boundaries, that's one of the biggest red flags to me now, is when somebody says, basically, what do you think about this? Or what do you think I should do? Or is this person really a narcissist or a sociopath? Because right there, that tells me that this person is disconnected from their reality, and that if they're looking towards, and I get it because I've been there, that they're looking to others for that validation, then that's a really big problem. Even if this relationship were to end, that alone, like that mindset of that, having that, placing that control, giving so much control to other people is a huge problem. And it's that, I mean, it's a crapshoot if that's going to blow up in their face again in the future. Odds are it probably will.
Yeah.
Well, if that's touching on the next part, but I don't think we're there yet. The owning and expressing your own reality. Like if you cannot think for yourself and feel for yourself and make judgments for yourself and decisions for yourself, and you're not either not aware of what's happening, or you are aware but you are afraid to act on it. That's it's all, that's why I feel it's all connected. Your boundaries with, like, all the symptoms together are really connected.
They really are. I mean, like
Yeah.
we can't make goods, we can't be self-protective or even be loving towards ourselves or others if we're so disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah. If you don't value yourself, you will not set boundaries to protect yourself. And then you don't value how you look at the world. Like, it's like you don't even value one thought you have about the world then.
And if you're not connected enough with your, I mean, it's so all interconnected. Like if you're not connected enough with your body to understand for it to register when you're being mistreated, then you're not going to set boundaries.
You don't. Like I had non-existent sexual boundaries for the longest because my abuse was so early in my life. And I literally would, like, if someone was threatening me, I would like stop feeling my body. Like it was gone. Like it was like, so it was non-existent, completely boundary, zero. And that's how real it is.
Yeah, it is. And so many people will say, like, they wait for that concrete proof. They wait, and I should say it's extreme concrete proof that there's a problem before they start setting a boundary. And that's a problem. It's too late then. Like it, you know, and so, and I think that's one of the biggest things here. Like if we can shift realizing when you're feeling perpetual confusion, when you're feeling mental anguish, when you're feeling irritation and anxiety and upset and anger, these are all signs of boundary violations. And these are important signs, and they're just as concrete as they're as real as anything else. And we don't need to wait for them to prove us right. Like we don't need to catch them in bed with somebody else, or for them to hit us, or, you know, start screaming at us, or any of these things like that.
You have to trust your own feelings and your own intuition.
Yeah, but you do it only if you have well-developed functional boundaries.
And you're in tune with your body.
It's a challenge. You have to really, you know, take on your codependency from every, you know, perspective, in every situation, and just, you know, just really face it. So
let's cover the third point here, which is what you're talking about, the reality. She says codependents don't often know what their reality is. Reality has 4 components: the body, our thinking, feeling, and behavior. And in terms of our body, it's how we look and how our bodies are operating. So a person that has trouble with this might either know how, I love this. So she divides it up into, we either have some sort of understanding of ourselves, or we don't. So we either know how we look and we don't want to admit it, or we might be so disconnected we don't know how we look.
She said at one point, didn't she say, like, when you look in the mirror, you don't see yourself, you see like your dad or your mom, and that's crazy to hear, but I guess I could see where it's possible. That's not me though. But
she gave an example of kind of having a need met. Well, maybe here's another example of this with pain. A lot of us, we might, here is a personal example. I, for the longest time, did not realize when I was in physical pain. And I was so used to just being in physical pain and glossing over it.
Like sucking it up.
Yeah. And then until my back would go out. And then I couldn't move, and I'd have to go get like a deep tissue massage and go to the chiropractor and take pain pills. And I was in bed for like 3 days. It was awful. And I remember thinking, like, because people would ask me, like, really, like, it just all of a sudden would go out. And then it took me a long time to realize, oh, actually, no, there's all of these early signs. Like my back would start spasming and I'd catch myself like rubbing my shoulders and like trying to work out tension and stretching. And there were all of these signs, but I just glossed over them until things got so bad I couldn't move.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like I wasn't even aware of the pain until I could no longer deny it. And so there's a lot of that with our body, like we're not understanding. And she talks about too, like with eating disorders, a person might gain a bunch of weight or lose a bunch of weight and not realize how they look. Like they're either they know how they look and they don't want to admit it, or they truly don't know how they look, which I think is often the case. Then you see a photo of yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, like when did I gain this weight? Right? Or when did I lose this weight? Like you're just shocked by what you see because we're so out of tune with our body. And so then the thinking part of that. So if we have difficulty knowing what our thoughts are, then we're going to have difficulty being able to accurately share them. And if difficulty with thinking also gives skewed interpretations to incoming data. So
feeling of confusion, I actually remember that symptom very well. When people would ask me, how are you feeling? How are you? What are you thinking? And I would be like, I didn't like that. Like now, like I would like not be able to say anything because there was nothing for me to articulate over there. Like I knew I was thinking something, but I just couldn't express it at all because it was all like confusion to me. So, and the same emotion, like it's because that lack of connection to your awareness of your reality can impact everything, your body, your behavior, right? Like your emotion and your thinking, and there was something else, but like all of it.
Continually blown away. You know, I had shared last night, I had this realization that I think I really realizing like I struggle with kind of like these perfectionistic tendencies. And then it's like, it's weird. How did I not know that about myself? And like, and then just other thoughts, or I'll do things like I'll say, I get all excited about wanting to do all these different projects. And I'll be like, yeah, totally. I'm totally in. And then I way overcommit myself and then I can't follow through on them. So like there's this disconnect. I sincerely mean everything that I say when I sign up for projects, like it, but it's not thought through. So there's this disconnect between like me and understanding like how much I can actually do and how well or not well I can do it. It's weird. So yeah.
What's crazy is that lack of complete awareness, like, and I think it's because, you know, like abusers are like also codependents, but they're like this extreme, arrogant and harmful, you know, side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my ex-husband would do certain things and then he would just like completely not know he did it. Like he wasn't in, and I think it actually fitted with him. Like, I don't think he was lying. He was like, he really believed every freaking word he was saying. That's how unaware he was of what he did. So that's like, that can happen from both sides. Now that doesn't excuse the behavior, of course,
No.
but it's that lack of awareness. Like, it's like you completely not aware you did something or you said something or you thought something. None of that is aware to you. Like,
yeah.
Well, I think they're so disconnected from their reality that gives them the ability to create reality on the fly.
And maybe that's why they don't commit suicide, because if they remember every single thing they did and being very aware of how much harm they're causing. I don't know. Like I was, because one time I remember I was just wondering, like, I'm not even trying to have any compassion there, but I was just wondering, like, how can you look in the mirror? Like literally, how can you look in the mirror? Like I wouldn't be able to look in the mirror knowing what I have done to another human being, but he can.
When you feel entitled to do what you do, there is no guilt or shame.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
So,
yes.
But when abusers do commit suicide, it's generally not because of what they've done. It's they don't want to face the consequences of what.
And they want attention and chase you even after they're dead. They want to hurt you too.
Yeah, like it has nothing to do with remorse. It has everything to do with like, I don't want to go to jail for life, or they're lonely or they're depressed about some sort of other issue. but it's not because of how they treat
No.
others.
No, completely. No,
yeah.
I get that. Yeah.
So, okay. So feeling, what we're talking about is the difficulty knowing what we are feeling, or the opposite, feeling overwhelming emotions, which is goes hand in hand with borderline personality disorder, which makes total sense because I really feel that there's so much overlap between borderline personality disorder and codependence. And I think borderline truly is something that stems, it really might even just be one and the same.
Well, it is not. It's just it's like I just remember what was, but I read something and that was like that the studies by psychologists that borderline and narcissist, it's all codependence. It's just it all streams out of the codependence. It's the same mechanism, except that those are going into the malignant side of being codependent. So that's why we survivors and victims don't like being called codependent often, because it's like the same freaking umbrella, but it's a similar mechanism. So it's all like in this one. It's almost like all prunes are plums, but not all plums are prunes, right? Like you just have to get at accept that we all stream from like the codependence. It just there are two different extremes. There's one extreme when you become like more like empath, and the other extreme when you become an abuser. And you can either be a perfect victim on one very extreme end, or you can be a perfect abuser on the other extreme. And I think it's maybe very triggering to.
Well, it's a boundary issue.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the common denominator for both of those is you have abusers who have no boundaries, right? There's no, especially self-containment boundary. So that's fueled by this entitlement mentality and probably a lot of unaddressed issues as well. Whereas the opposite side of the stream of that is extreme codependency, who also has no boundaries, but they're not trying to actively abuse others, but they're not aware that they're actively being abused. And that's a problem. Pia Melody, I think it was in a video that I saw of hers once. She touched on it briefly in this book that basically untreated codependency can lead to death, suicide, addiction. And I agree completely. Like, I think it's such a huge thing that because a person's going to keep running these patterns of these 5 core symptoms, like if these 5 areas are out of alignment, a person, you're going to keep getting hurt time and time again and not realize what's going on. And after a certain amount of time, I could see how a person was just like, I'm cursed. Like, I'm just done, and they just give up and they're just done. Or they're murdered because they keep seeing the good in other people and they're living in the fantasy and they stay in dangerous situations because there's no self-protective boundary there. So yeah, it's a big deal.
It was weird to see like the similarities between like what you hear about narcissists being manipulative and stuff and codependence being manipulative too, because I wasn't expecting that to be in this book. Like that word manipulative and stuff. That sucks to read and to know that. It makes me feel like really
but because there's a difference. You're not malignant, but you still like everyone can manipulate someone and ask that the non-malignant codependent people like us, like the ones that we are more like a victim mice, I guess. For us, manipulation is like we are unaware of it sometimes because it's just the way for us to deal with and trying to survive, I guess. And protect ourselves. I don't know. I think it's a deep discussion. It's stay away from it.
I think it's important to address. I see it as when so you've got, I think, codependents that are more of the people pleasing variety. They're not necessarily manipulative. And of course, this is on a spectrum, but then you have the caretaking ones. And the caretaking ones tend to be very controlling. Oh, you need to wear a jacket. Oh, you need to wear a scarf. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you should do this. Oh. And it's smothering and it might be coming from a place of like care and concern, but it's micromanaging. And
can you be a blend of both though?
Sure. I think
of
so.
Course. It's
these are all boundary issues. And so I think most people, when you read this book, myself included, you're like, wow, okay, yeah, I like
Yeah.
a little from all of the categories,
Mhm.
and a little in certain categories at different times in my life. But I think the one thing, I mean, with Pia Melody, I think the beauty of her work is there's no room for confusion. Like you read through this and you're like, okay, she spells this out so clearly
Yep.
that, and once you have that level of awareness of, oh my goodness, I did not realize that this was a problem, or I didn't realize that I was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I think for most of us, because we do seek to be team oriented, and solutions oriented, we see this and we're like, oh my goodness, okay, yes, this is something that I'd like to work on. And even just having that awareness can often change, like radically change a person's behavior, just bringing it to their awareness. So
Definitely.
Well, it's hard to feel that we are on the same spectrum, but
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a pill hard to swallow, but
It makes
when
sense though, because that's why I kind of struggled for a while. And I would ask in some of Dana's live streams, like, what's the difference in needing validation for a codependent and for a narcissist? And, what's the difference between a few other things? Can't think of them right now, but
Well, you're
but
not
it
gonna
does
go
kind
and
of
hurt
make sense.
someone just to get validation, right? And narcissists would just go and do that.
Right.
So they malignant basically, and
Right.
they
I think codependents have more of a sense of self, whereas narcissists just really don't. And
Yeah.
narcissists have more of their defense mechanism that's engaged is that fight defense, whereas codependents, it's more of the friend or the freeze or the flight defenses.
and
So,
codependence is more like a
What can I do
condition,
to
not
make this better?
disorder. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying that, diagnostically speaking, like codependence isn't like personality disorder. It's just like a spectrum or like what condition. It's a condition. When narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, those are extreme. They extreme, and they have like some extras to it. I'm gonna say that way, and they are a personality disorder. Like they are so deep on that. I don't know.
I don't know.
They're
I
on
mean, go
Is
ahead, Jen.
codependency in the DSM?
No.
No, it's not.
Because my therapist mentioned it's not codependent. Is it
Is it dependent?
dependent personality something? And I think that's in the DSM. So
Yes.
that's kind of the difference.
It's different in the sense that dependent personality disorder is a person that has that is truly, I would say that's a subsection of how Pia Melody is defining codependence. So like dependent personality it's quite something when you see it in an adult. It's an adult that truly acts like a child, and they are completely unable. They turn for a woman, they might turn their spouse into their father, and they become very childlike, and they're completely unable to take care of themselves. They rely on others. They're still relying on their parents. They're still, it's extreme. It's extreme dependence.
Yeah, that does sound pretty extreme.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's enough of a big deal for it to be considered a personality disorder. Codependence, I think the difference is codependence is more, and I like the way that Pia Melody describes it because it's more encompassing. It's like a person can be dependent, they can be anti-dependent, they can be, there's these struggles with boundaries. A lot of this, all of this stuff is really, kind of these core issues of like self-care, self-esteem, self-worth, self-protection, and just getting into alignment with ourselves.
Well, I wouldn't feel like I'm a codependent, no shame in it. I'm dealing with my codependency. It's a condition you can completely recover from if you put some work into it. I actually bought a workbook for myself, so I'm taking it on.
But those well, we just said those they can't really.
They cannot, but we can.
They could in theory, And there's a certain guy on YouTube that claims he can cure it, but he can't he can't cure himself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's probably not possible.
Well, I think whenever, like we were talking about earlier, as far as change goes, like a person has to experience enough pain as the catalyst for all change.
Yes.
So there has to be enough pain of like what we're doing isn't working for us to get out of that comfort zone and to do something different. If a person's not experiencing guilt or shame or remorse, there's no pain present. So if they feel entitled, I mean, it's the whole, if you think about like the Civil War, I mean, people had slaves, right? And they felt entitled to have slaves. They saw nothing wrong with it. And it took a war to happen to be like, this needs to stop. Like, you guys don't see what you're doing is wrong. We're going to fight you over it. And so sometimes massive action has to happen, but like people, if they don't see that within themselves of like what I'm doing is wrong, there's no catalyst to change. And and in going through all of this, like change is it's a daily process of like continual reexamination and experiencing continual pain. Like some people were talking about in the chat, like I think it was Dandelion who was saying when she feels like she talks too much in a conversation, she feels embarrassed, she feels bad. It's these kinds of feelings of shame and embarrassment that can really help us develop like moderation in our behavior. But the
narcissists don't have that ability.
They don't have that, and so
they can't even reflect on anything.
No.
And if you've ever known one, there's no growth. It's weird. Like if you ever know a narcissist, they once you see their behavior clearly, you're like, oh my God, I'm dealing with a 6-year-old, a bratty, awful 6-year-old in an adult body. And then you see him 20 years later and you're like, oh my God, it's still the same 6-year-old.
Yeah.
But now they have gray hair. Like it's really wild. There is no emotional or personal growth present. So
Patricia Evans talked about that, about they never emerge to like adult reality. So they're just kind of stuck in that childhood stage like you just talked about.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Like a 3-year-old, yep. Tantrums and stuff.
So, and that's anybody really. That's not, we all kind of go through life thinking that we are the baseline for normal. Our behavior tends to keep us relatively safe. You know, it tends to work up until it's proven that it doesn't work. And it's the same thing with holding on for hope for like an alcoholic or an anorexic or anybody else. I mean, when I was a nurse, I can't tell you how many people, like all they had to do was take a pill every single day.
And they wouldn't.
They wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Or you've got to change your diet. You're diabetic. Like you're going to start, and like the pain is so great. You're going to start losing limbs. Like this is real. This impacts you and nobody else. All you need to do is I know you don't like needles. Nobody does, but do you like your toes? Because that's where that's what we're talking about. So now it's, and trying to get through to them and still, I mean, it's so tragic when you see somebody that's dying and you're with them and it's like, my God, this is so preventable.
My friend dad is in the hospital now just because of that. He's a diabetic and he just refused to take care of himself. And she found him on the floor in a coma.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've known people that are diabetic and they would eat sweets and just like a ton, and then they would go take their insulin. Like, that's not how this works at all.
Yep.
And it's frustrating because there's nothing you can do about it.
That's why dealing with codependency is so important, so we can act like mature, functional adults.
It's a tough realization to know that you can't, no matter what love you give somebody, you can't make anybody change unless they want to.
That's right.
It's painful how we can see those things in extreme situation, but like what really we need to see how in everyday we actually don't see some of extreme behaviors we have or thinking.
Yes.
That's how you start dealing with yourself. Like you need to really start looking at how present you are to your own reality. I'm trying to bring us back. I hope you guys see the see that?
I did.
And that's so true because it is about being self-protective. It is about valuing yourself and seeing our own lack of self-care in certain areas and realize like this is a big deal. And if we can truly shift our focus onto what we can control, which is us, and realize that, like James was saying, our love can't save somebody else. Like they need, to come to
It's
that
up to
own
them.
conclusion.
Yeah.
And it can be really tragic and
Well,
heartbreaking.
it's hard to own your own reality. Like if you are born this special child and you have your value, you have your immaturity, you have all those characteristics of the child, and basically you are made wrong for all of that by your dysfunctional codependent parents. So you cannot own your reality because your reality was being made wrong all the time. Like
Yes.
that's the I call I think she says that too, that that's just basically it's a psychological or intellectual abuse, or I don't remember how she calls that exactly, but you can develop mature in a healthy way in those kind of codependent families.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So then point number 4, she talks about is wants and needs. And she categorizes, so people that struggle with codependency really have a difficult time with understanding and meeting their wants and needs. And so
Or
she has,
even knowing what your wants and needs are sometimes.
absolutely. And so she covers that. So the first one is that we're too dependent. So we might know our wants and needs, but we might expect other people to take care of them for us.
Yeah.
And because we're not able to take care of them ourselves. I would say when people are starting to make this shift into learning to trust again, developing healthy trust, this is something that I see people fall into where they're like, boy, I really hope this other person's going to treat me right. I hope they're not going to be an abuser.
That expectation.
And it's like, I really hope that this other person's going to take care of me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it because I was there too, but
Guilty too. Yeah.
but it's problematic thinking because it's sort of like, okay, but you know what? They're going to act however they're going to act and time will tell. It's up to us to be responsible to take care of us and to respond to their behavior accordingly.
Well, in the past, I've focused on other people and their needs and their wants so much that you completely, stop taking care of your own wants and needs, so it's tough to break out of that.
It is there's so many, my goodness, like little
layers
and like aha moments. It's kind of like you're Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz, you're following this yellow brick road and hopefully you have good traveling companions, right? People that are with you and they're moving in the same direction. There's so many different ways that you can get knocked off course, and there's so many little aha moments that you have along the way to make your life work. It's quite the journey.
You know what I discovered, and that's so crazy. We were reading this book now because do you remember when I said that I don't have power in my house?
Yes.
So I had a problem because I didn't know that I didn't pay my electric bill because I thought I'm paying my electric bill, but they weren't providing me with electricity, only gas. But anyway, when my power got disconnected, my first emotional reaction to it is that no one can know because everyone will be angry with me. And it was crazy because I realized that my mother, and when I was reading this book, it was really clear to me. My mother, if I needed something, like I came home from school and I don't know, I didn't do well on some tests, or I needed help with my homework, it was such a freaking reason to get angry with me. Like, so I literally was trying that if I need help, people are angry with me because I need help. How dare I need help? Like, and it's so crazy because I've seen it now, and it's like my mom is not the same way now. My mom, she recovered from lots of her issues. She's still not great. Like she's so unaware of how codependent he is, but I don't think I can even give her a book to read about it because they'll be too confronting. Like I have no idea how to impact that. But she's a different person now. But when she was parenting me, She was dealing with so much stuff that she was one of those parents that if you come to her with a want or a need, she was react with anger and shame me, because I think she was transferring that shame and anger from her, her situation. Like, she needed help, but she was ashamed to tell anyone and ask anyone for help. So everything was going on me,
So it
basically.
was like
And
a
then,
projection.
and like, remember when Pia says more later about how, and I think it was in the other book too, in what did we do last time?
Love
Like,
addiction.
in a love
Based
addiction,
on
when
love
she
addiction.
says how some of the thing, like, we have a feelings about reality, what's happening right now, and we have a feelings of empathy, like, we feel for other people, but then we have those pushed on us, through our broken boundaries, feelings from our parents that they did not want to deal with. So I've been walking around in my life with so much freaking shame, and I had and it wasn't just based on my history of abuse. Lots of that shame, it makes sense now, was from my mother being ashamed and keeping the secrets of her being abused by my father. So my wants and needs, there was no place for that. So I was someone who was wantless, needless for a while. Like, if you ask me, what do you want? I would be like, I just want everyone to be happy. I would say that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You're like the peacekeeper. You know,
Yes. Do
like
not
you
be
feel it's
angry.
your
I want
job to
you
make
to
everybody
be.
else happy. That's not possible.
Yeah. Perfect victim. I swear to God, like, when you are very much conditioned by your codependent parents, you can become such a freaking perfect victim, such an easy target. It's
Mhm. Oh, it's the perfect storm,
yes.
right? I mean, if you have no boundaries and you believe commitments forever, and if anything bad happens, it's all your fault.
And I
Like,
want you to be happy.
and you just want to, right? And you just want to keep the peace in your life, and you just want to make the other person happy, and you think your love can fix them. Like,
Happy wife, happy life.
happy life, right?
And you
Right.
walk around singing, all
Oh,
I need is
I hate
love.
that
Da,
saying.
da, 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 da.
Right. I agree, James. Like, that's super toxic. And a lot of these messages are propagated, and
And a lot of people say it too.
they do.
Or like, oh, it's up to your wife. You should just let her like make all the decisions. And that's very unhealthy, and it lets somebody that's toxic kind of have an easier road to
Oh,
abuse.
absolutely. Yeah. Cause then I think any manipulative person's going to kind of grab on to whatever power they think they have. And so, yeah, I see this a lot with, women will use different techniques than men. And that's one of them. The whole, well, I should just get to choose everything in the house. Right. And you shouldn't fight me over it. And, happy wife, happy life, and this kind of stuff. And it's like, God, that's ridiculous. Like, he's not a child. Like,
And you're not a child.
and even still, even if he was, like, really, like, you're going to pick out everything in your, teenager's room. Like, I don't know, just stuff like that. I agree with you. It bothers me too.
Yeah, and I had a situation once where she used to like she would have rearranged like entire rooms. I would get home and they're completely rearranged. So one day I get home from work and she's rearranged everything but my rocking chair, which is like the one place I sit at.
Mm.
She wanted to move it, and
There were boundaries around
when I
you.
like stood up for myself, it was like she just exploded. Like, how dare you, like,
Have a problem.
have an issue with me not making all the decisions.
Oh my
Like,
goodness.
that's not how this works.
Yeah.
It's 50-50 or
Right.
100-100.
Well, at least it was your wife. My former mother-in-law, she would walk into my house and rearrange things in my house.
That takes some nerve to
Very happy boundaries over there.
like, that's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. So she mentions there's the two dependent, there's the anti-dependent, who may or may not be able to acknowledge that they have wants or needs, and oftentimes doesn't ask for help or guidance from others. Needless and wantless. And then getting I love this one so much, getting wants and needs confused. So they might know what they want and get it. They might know what they want, but they don't know how to get it. And so they confuse these. So for example, they might have the need of physical nurturing, but instead they buy food or go shopping, or they might drink.
There's the whole model of healthy diet, healthy nutrition based on that, to know what want do you have, what need do you have right now. Like before you go and eat something, you actually ask yourself, do I have a need for food or do I have a need for hug? Like it's a nutritionist something school. My friend did that, and it for me was like, whoa, that's crazy, because I realized that I've been eating ice cream when I was lonely.
Can you send it to me if you find that article or whatever?
Yeah, I can find it out. Yeah.
Because I'm guilty of that. Like I'll
We are guilty of that.
Ice cream or chocolate or
Yeah. But I think it's really telling when you're aware of that. I've heard that this concept talked about in terms of primary food and secondary food. So primary food is like emotional food, and secondary food is like physical food. And when people are eating out of like boredom or fear or anger or sadness, and it's the same reasons people also drink oftentimes, or do any type of kind of self-soothing habit, shopping. It makes you feel good in the moment, but it's not obviously not a good long-term.
not when you get the bill.
Right. Or gain the weight or get a DUI. Yeah.
Or trying to get attention, in a weird way, instead of like asking directly, hey, give me a hug, or can we just talk, or something like that.
Yeah. So I really like that, like understanding, getting our wants and needs confused. And
I was thinking, like, it's crazy. I mean, oh gosh, I say it's crazy too often. I'm not gonna say that again. It would be so great if we actually had this kind of conversation with our children, like, hey, there are certain things that you really need in your life, and you have a need for physical touch, you have a need for I don't know, like just needs, and then there are things you want and wants. And I like how she like gives you access to know the difference between a need and a want. So wants are something that you give it to yourself and it brings you some sort of joy, right? That's what she says. Like it just gives you like this boost of happiness or joy for a moment. And I was thinking, yeah, that's great to teach it to our children. There are things that will just give them some joy for a moment, and there are needs that they need to have, like primary needs, and yeah.
I guess I keep saying I am such a fan. I really feel like this stuff, understanding, like manipulation, understanding boundaries, understanding like having a core sense of self, and it can even come from like a more empowered place, like understanding self-care, how to self-esteem, self-worth, self-protection. These moderation.
Oh my God, moderation.
Yes.
Hey, you are extreme. You know what? When you're adult, you'll be a little bit more moderate. Can you try to act moderately now?
Well, but teaching this stuff at a young age, and then continuing to have these conversations as the child gets older, and in ways that are more and more age appropriate, just like we do with sex education, right? Or the ways really that it should be done with sex education, because you don't want your kid figuring it out in the backseat of somebody's car.
Oh
right?
God, I know.
So, yeah.
I've been dealing with it, so I've been educating my daughter in a very weird way sometimes, to be uncomfortable ways. But God, my mom, she'd give me nothing. Zero.
My mom gave me a book and said, "Here, if you have any questions, come ask me."
Go ask your father.
Nope. She said, "Come ask me if you have any questions."
I found the porn magazine somewhere in my mom drawer. That was my sexual education. and I found condoms, and I thought they were balloons, so that was another sexual education.
Oh, real quick. People are asking about the book for next month, and thank you for bringing that up. It's the book we're going to be doing is it's called The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. I believe it was Rob last night who'd mentioned he read it. I'll put a link down below. That's not a link. That's the title of the book. Hold on.
Close.
That's close. That's half of it. Let me go to Amazon.
The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. It's just, I'm so happy. The title makes me happy.
I hope this one's an audio book because I don't. Why did Pia Melody never release
Dude,
hers in
I
audio?
don't.
Unless and it's on her website and it's like $40 for a.
No, I don't know. She doesn't even have the ebook version.
That's why it was like ebook people.
You would think, yeah, exactly that too. You would think she would want to make it like widely available because it is 2018. We have the technology.
I know. My guess is that I don't know why her publisher hasn't done that. And I don't know if she's just not into ebooks and audiobooks, but I went through so much hassle to try to get, I ordered this book 3 times.
I have
the
a
first
used
time
one.
it didn't show up. The second one, I ordered it and it should be here today. And so then I had to go to the mall, right? Then I had to go to the mall and buy a copy, like, what was it, like last Wednesday or something.
They still have bookstores that are.
Shush, James. Come on. They do.
Yes.
They do.
And honestly, James, it didn't even dawn on me to go to a bookstore. I was like,
I didn't either.
I was totally like, I don't know what to do. I can't order it from Amazon. What do I do? I called my library. They didn't have it. I went through so much to get this.
Dang, I didn't even think of the library at all.
Yeah.
Also, is this a different edition of the book than what you guys are?
So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are there any differences or is it the same?
That's a good question. I don't know. Mine doesn't have an edition number on it, but your cover.
Mine is revised.
This one is.
Mine is.
Where does it say the edition number? No, we're gonna read how you.
What does the cover of yours look like?
First, it says first edition.
Oh wow, mine is revised. You have the original, man.
Okay, yeah, no, mine is revised and updated. Is yours have the gold cover, Healthy Love?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, we have the same one.
Yeah, but I had to buy the used one because they were on a backtrack.
Yeah, but it was, let's get back to notes.
Yeah, because this is so much gold in here, God.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the wants and needs thing. So where difficulty meeting our wants and needs comes from is if a parent takes care of a child's every need, then that child becomes dependent. If a parent shames or abuses the child for expressing a need, the child becomes anti-dependent and has trouble reaching out for help as an adult. If a child's needs were ignored or neglected, the child may become wantless and needless as an adult and may not be aware of their wants and needs. If a child's needs were met with wants, as an adult, they may get these two things confused, such as using food, sex, or just stuff in order to feel a sense of reassurance or acceptance.
Yeah, I didn't get that one.
What do you mean you didn't get it?